My bad. We let a child sex offender, dressed up like a girl, read to those kids. That was probably not the best thing we could do, and we're sorry. That was great. They nailed it.
Soy boy Chloe is 110% organic, non-GMO, gender misogynistic immigration, identitarian.
And there's no need for anyone to think that is unacceptable. We're going to shut them down and work with whoever it is to shut them down, and they should be prosecuted. You cannot intimidate members of Congress.
What's up? Alan Spence.
They try to rearrange
Thank you, guys. For some reason, it's not wanting to show me who's online. It's frustrating. Oh, for crying out loud. My account is not connecting for some damn reason.
I'm not gonna respond to that. I already used too many words. I was told by my handler, don't talk on this because I will shove my foot in my mouth. Just don't do that. Just move on. Just move on. It's dumb. How could
The
you
video's
do
about,
this?
we're going to read a couple articles. It's
Policy with the Ukraine as vice president.
about John Podesta's military war gaming,
Told the government that if they didn't
ballot
fire the
harvesting,
people,
police
they
shooting,
would
or
put the
false
company,
flag. The only one that will
my son
get
was
old
involved in
Trumpsky and
$50,000
Biden into
here,
office.
and he didn't know jack
And just
anything
something, I
about
just
his
found it
job.
interesting,
How could you
kind of
be
how
president
they're going to play out. But for some
I did
reason, my
anything wrong?
restream
Even though
is
I
not
sat and I
connecting,
bragged
and
about
it's
the fact I got this guy
bugging me.
fired, and I told him I wasn't going to give him money.
So,
they did what
you
I
guys
said.
can hold with me for a second
That I
here.
did anything wrong. This is just
I was
a
just
dumb
going to go
question.
straight into it.
And I can't believe we're entertaining me and all these other social media platforms people say they struggle with figuring out where the line is and how to, we remove hate speech, but we also want to promote free speech and discussion. It's very simple. It's very simple. All you got to do is follow the Constitution. Follow the Constitution. Follow the Bill of Rights. Follow the First Amendment. Be elected president. She says Senator Kamala Harris said that if she is elected president, she will give Congress 100 days to act on gun control. If they don't, she'll take matters into her own hands, she said during the CNN town hall. Wow, that doesn't sound like a dictatorial response, right? That doesn't sound like a very democratic position to have.
Okay, I guess I'll just go that way. Close that out because that is not giving me the right connections. All right.
Not farther away in water. I'm pretty sure she came out against Trump when he said he was going to take executive action.
Don't know if the chat's going to work properly or not, guys, so I'm just going to go for it here.
Constitution and the Bill of Rights. You are that. Side note, the Democrats months ago were saying there was no crisis at the border. Now read the headlines. There's a crisis at the border.
Ooh, gonna be a drink of water. We're gonna kick this thing off. I don't think I'm gonna wait the full 2 minutes.
Nation state, right? Drop the end.
So good, so good.
Shooter opened fire in
All right, let's just get after it here.
Oregon district, a popular downtown area. Two freaking conservative
Yeah, let's just
tweets.
get after it. I don't know if my chats are coming through, so actually before we get after it, I'm going to do one more thing, guys.
Pretty interesting.
Okay, maybe I am using this.
Because they happen so close.
I'm going to pop my chat out on YouTube and D-Live. If you're out there, try putting something up in the chat. I don't know if I'm actually connected with my restream, so I may not see your chat. So if I don't, I'm not trying to ignore you. I'm going to pop this out. Chat.
There's an issue of public corruption.
Under.
Apparently, Snapchat.
Okay, yeah, it's working there, I guess. Alan Spencer, Ray D, how are you guys? We don't got a lot of people. Because that's just. I haven't been streaming enough lately. I do it at the wrong times. But it doesn't matter, I got you guys. So that's all that matters. Alright, let's get after it. Should I wait to 50 seconds? Alright. Where am I? There I am. What's going on, everybody? Why is my screen? Is that because I screwed with it on the other side? Oh no, maybe it's because it's up a little high there. Maybe it's because I bumped it or something. I don't know. What is going on? My few friends. Audio way off. It's fixed. And is my audio better now, or is it still way off? Yes, no, maybe. I'll wait for you to. You mean my lips were way off from my moving? Anyways, thanks you guys for joining me tonight. I thought I would jump on because I haven't really done hadn't done a stream for a while and I was itching to do one. So what's up, John Rhodes? Okay, good. You are. I am seeing you come through on chat there. Okay, good. That makes me feel better that your guys' chat is coming through. I'm gonna move it over here, make it a little bigger. If I can do that. How do I do that? Make it a little bigger so I can see. I see old chats. Yeah, in D-Live, the chats stay around. It's pretty cool. They just stay there. So it's kind of cool. So I'm going to shut this off since we are connected and I can see all your chats right there. Perfect. All right. So what I was going to do a video on tonight is I'm going to read two articles that I found pretty interesting in regards to a projection of how the election is going to play out and the games that are going to be played by the Democrats come election night. I will be live streaming the election. I will be starting earlier in the evening. I'm going to make sure I get off early that day from work. So just for anybody who gives a crap, I will be definitely streaming the election. Because it is going to be a shit show, man. It's going to be crazy. I'm going to be doing it on D-Live though, because YouTube will take us down. We won't be able to do it on YouTube. So, all my YouTube people, it'll be a good night. I'll probably set the camera up inside and be streaming with the wife and everybody, just walking around. I'll have it up on the big screen and. It'll be an interesting night, so you guys make sure you tune in, and we'll have a good time. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about tonight, I wanted to read a couple articles, and I think what we'll do is we'll read this one, and then as it leads me to the other article, I'll read that article. So we'll read this article in succession, and. It's an article that came out. Who's this? FRN. I don't even know the news guy, but he really lays it out well. I originally first found the article on Strategic Cultural Foundation, which is right and left. It's a bipartisan news organization, opinion piece commentary, really good. But basically, what it games out, and then we're going to jump into it. Basically, what it games out is how the election. How the Democrats right now on the left are already preparing for the, in case the situation arises where Trump wins, how they're going to contest it. It's going to be a contested election. We're not probably going to know on election night unless it's just absolutely he wins the popular vote and he wins the electoral vote. Then there may not be any more thing they could even do. But if it's in any way, shape, or form close, then it's going to be contested. And there's talk of secession. And this isn't coming from conspiracy theorists. It's come from John Podesta when he war gamed this out several weeks back. There's talk about secession of California, Oregon, and Washington seceding from the Union, which I could give a shit less if they do, because I would be leaving anyways. I'm already thinking about getting out of Oregon. So if they do, I think it would be a win for the nation if we could just freaking cut these 3 states out of the Union and just get rid of them. I wish we could just kind of right along the border, dynamite it and just float them out to sea. I want to leave first though and get off of it, but because this is just a Marxist freaking wonderland. So we're going to talk about that. I'm in Oregon, and I don't like to totally tell exactly where I'm at. Most people know, but I won't mention it. But I'm down and around by the wildfires that are happening right now. It's crazy. I can smell the smoke outside, and I see a little bit of ash floating around when I take a flashlight. It's pretty crazy. I'm not close enough to where I'm going to worry about getting evacuated, although we are on a get set. Right now we're at the get set stage. It's get set, get ready, and go. So we're at the get set, or maybe we're at the get ready. We're at the first stage. Third stage is one where you got mandatory evacuations. That's neither here nor there. But it's pretty crazy right now, man. What more could 2020 throw at us, huh? What more could 2020 throw at us? Was Pizzagate real at all? I don't know enough about Pizzagate to really speak to it, Ray, to be honest. I know it got a lot of bad conspiratorial press, but that doesn't necessarily mean it isn't true. I definitely think that the rulers, the elite ruling predator class, whatever you want to call them, the elite of the elites, are slimy, evil, gross, debased dirtbags. All of them. Just about all of them. So I don't know if it was real at all, but it wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me if it was, So who knows? I don't know, man. I don't know. But it's kind of nice not knowing how many people are watching, because I don't get worried that I'm going to lose people or people are going to get bored. I'm just going to talk, and if people don't like it, they don't have to listen. But I always do talk too much in the beginning. So why don't we jump into this article, because I find it pretty interesting, and I didn't want to go all night because I would like to watch a show before my bedtime. But I've been watching Yellowstone. Pretty good show. Pretty good show. Anyways, yeah, let's jump in. Sorry, a little off my game. Okay, so as you can see, maybe you can't. I was scrolling on the wrong one. This is an article written by this news organization, and it says Biden's chances rest on John Podesta-Planned military coup, ballot harvesting, police shooting, and a false flag. By Joaquin Flores. So, let's read it. How about that? Not in a real... I appreciate it, Ray. Thank you, man. I haven't been doing enough of it. And I'm not going to read a lot of chats tonight, otherwise I'll totally get sidetracked like I am right now. But before I jump in to read this, last night I sat down and I made myself a schedule of content that I'm going to put out, and I'm going to try to do it Monday through Friday. At least 4 to 5 times a week. I'm going to be trying to I'm going to try to do 2 live streams a week, with a possible one on the weekend, most weekends, and then videos Monday through Friday. I'm going to try to do that. It's a lot of work when you work full time, because, to put anything out worthwhile, you got to do some research on it and read and put your thoughts together. And when you don't get home till 6 o'clock, you go to work at 6:37 in the morning, and you don't come home till 6 o'clock at night. And then you got family time and make dinner and all these other things. It doesn't leave you a lot of time to do those things. So I'm doing the best I can, but I'd like to get more content out. But I thank you and I appreciate you for saying that. It's very nice, Ray, and I appreciate you appreciating me. So there's that. Okay, let's try this. Our early August prognosis published by SCF, Strategic Council Foundation, on August 23rd that Joe Biden would not concede the election even if Trump wins was confirmed by Hillary Clinton herself on August 25th. Do you guys we all remember that? It was all major news on most news and YouTubers were all talking about how Hillary Clinton came out and told Joe Biden even if he loses, he must not concede. In no circumstances should he succeed. Hillary's still a bitter bitch. Let's just be real here. She's still really butthurt that she lost. And that's awesome. But so she told Biden he shouldn't concede. So we know she is a mouthpiece for the Democratic for the Democrats, and so we know that's pretty. It's a safe bet that all of them feel the same way and are giving him the same advice. So it says this piece will follow up on the strategy involved in that piece. I wonder, should we read that piece? I didn't read it. I wonder how long it is. Oh, Hillary Clinton says Joe Biden should not concede on election night. Yeah, we already know that. I'm not going to read that. We already know that she said that. This piece will follow up on the strategy involved in that piece and develop these in light of John Podesta's election war game and the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So this was written back on August 5th. Okay. No, not August 5th. This was written just recently. Oh, come on, where's it? September 1st, I'm sorry. So this is in the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin. In Kenosha situation, we have armed groups on both sides creating volatile situation in what increasingly looks like a pre-Civil War scenario. Altogether, we can now see the following as evident. So now before I read the rest of this, he mentioned up here John Podesta and what he talked about. The think tank that did this, the Democratic think tank that did this, sent their war games to the Boston Globe. So let's read what this all talks about. So we going into what this other article talks about, we have a little bit of a context, right? A bipartisan group secretly gathered to game out a contested Trump-Biden election, and it wasn't pretty. This came out on July 26th. Okay, so here we go. On the second Friday in June, a group of political operatives, former government and military officials, and academics quietly convened online for what would become a disturbing exercise in the fragility of the American democracy. Move this over for this article here. The group, which included Democrats, Republicans, gathered to game out possible results of the November election, grappling with questions that seem far-fetched by the day. What if President Trump refuses to concede a loss, as he publicly hinted recently he might do? Well, when he hinted that, guys, it's mostly simply because he was trolling people. I think he can't wait to get the hell out of there. That's just me, though. How far could he go to preserve his power, and what if Democrats refuse to give in? All of our scenarios ended in both street-level violence and political impasse. Now, does anybody think it's out of the ordinary or out of the realm of possibility to have some significant, crazy street violence? Of course not, because we've been watching it for the last 2 months happen. We've been watching it unfold before our very eyes for the last 2 or 3 months now. Crazy, and it gets crazier every day. Think about the election now. Let's dump the gasoline election on there. The gasoline election on top of that, especially if Trump wins. And think about the protest that's going to break out. All of the scenarios ended in street-level violence and political impasse, said Rosa Brooks, a Georgetown law professor and former Defense Department official who co-organized the group known as the Transition Integrity Project. She described what they found in bleak terms. The law is essentially, it's almost helpless against a president who is willing to ignore it. It is so amazing to me when we read this, how the left and the Democrats are putting on the right and the conservatives all the very exact to the T things they are doing. It is 100% projection right now. 100%. So every single thing you hear come out of the mouth of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, all these, The Atlantic, all these left-leaning, it is a full-fledged smear campaign, and every single thing that comes out of their mouth, that whatever they are accusing the right of doing, you don't even need to research it. You should, but every single thing to a T that they are accusing others of, they are doing exactly themselves. So when they say right here that she described what they found in bleak terms, the law is essentially, it's almost helpless against a president who is willing to ignore it, right? Well, the law is essentially helpless against a government that's willing to ignore it. Not just the president, the Congress and the FBI and the CIA and everyone else. Anybody on the left, they are doing the exact same damn thing. Using a role-playing game that is a fixture of military and national security planning, the group envisioned a dark 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day, one in which Trump and his Republican allies used every apparatus of government, the Postal Service, state lawmakers, the Justice Department, federal agents, and the military, to hold on to power, and the Democrats took to the courts and the streets to try to stop it. That's a flip-flop right there. The Democrats are using everything within their power to gain power. They're using the Postal Service by pushing the mail-in ballots. They're pushing state lawmakers. They're pushing the Justice Department, federal agents, and the military to get power, not to hold on to it, to get the power. And it's the Republicans who might take to the courts and the street to try to stop it, along with the Democrats. Whatever, it's going to be a shit show. If it sounds like a paranoid or outlandish, a war room of seasoned politicos, this is not a conspiracy theory, this really happened. A war room of seasoned politicos and constitutional experts playing a Washington version of Dungeons and Dragons in which the future of the Republic hangs in the balance, they get it. But as they finalize a report on what they learned and begin briefing elected officials and others, they insist their warning is serious. So they are setting the stage right now for a loss and setting the stage for people not to believe it. And they're accusing Trump that that's what, we're going to read later, that that's what he's doing, conditioning his people not to believe it, which essentially is happening. The deep bureaucracy that wants to rip this country apart, the deep powers that want to see complete division are playing each other perfectly. It's not just a Democrat thing. It's in a lot of ways bipartisan against people who aren't truly patriots, who just want to live their lives in peace, right? This is a staging. It's a preparing. It's getting people ready and their minds programmed and brainwashed to watch unfold and to take action when it does. They're insisting it's serious. A close election this fall is likely to be contested, and there are few guardrails to stop constitutional crisis, particularly if Trump flexes the considerable tools at his disposal to give himself an advantage. He doesn't have a lot of, he doesn't have anybody on his side, hardly. He doesn't have to win the election, said Nils Gillum, a historian who leads research at a think tank called the Berggruen Institute and was an organizer of the exercise. He just has to create a plausible narrative that he didn't lose. What does that sound like they're doing right now? They are doing the exact same thing. That left is actively doing that. Everything Trump has said has been in response to the insanity that the left is pushing out. And he's been responding and calling out truth, quite frankly, in a lot of ways. When he says there's a lot of fraud that happens in mail-in fraud, it's true. It's proven. It's true. They say, oh, this has been debunked, but they don't tell you how it's been debunked because it hasn't been debunked. There's a lot of fraud in mail-in voting. So they're doing okay, well, you get the point. I'm not going to say this every time they make a sentence, say that's exactly what they're doing, but that's exactly what they're doing. The very existence of a group like this one, which was formed late last year, underscores the extent of the fear in the Washington political circles and beyond that Trump will take the same hammer he used to fracture the norms of executive governance over the past 3 years and upend the nation's. What the? I know I keep saying I'm not going to do that, but Trump will take the same hammer he has used to fracture the norms of executive governance. Russian collusion, right? Taxpayer dollars on Russian collusion and on all these other things that have been constantly laid against the president. And I am not happy with some of the things the president is pushing right now when it comes to the vaccine and when it comes to rolling that out and how he's gotten on board with this scamdemic and doesn't call it out for what it is. But to say that Trump will use the hammer that he has used to fracture the norms of executive governance, that Trump has been doing that is laughable if anyone's been paying attention. The only people that have been doing that is the left and the Democrats to an extraordinary degree. Over the past 3 years, and upend the nation's delicate tradition of orderly political transition of power by refusing to concede if he loses. Even though Hillary's coming out and literally saying, don't concede, Joe Biden, if you lose. Don't concede. But they're saying Trump is doing this. It's just mind-boggling how dumb how blatant the hypocrisy is. We have norms in our transition rather than laws, said Rachel Kleinfeld, a senior fellow in the Democracy Conflict Governance Program at the Carnegie Foundation, who was not part of the game. This entire election season is something a democracy expert would worry about. It is a fear that has been stoked by the president himself, who has repeatedly warned without offering evidence. Oh my God, there's been plenty of evidence. A widespread fraud involving mail-in ballots, which voters are likely to use at unprecedented levels because the pandemic has made in-person voting a potential health risk. No, it has not. The scientists who all these dumbasses follow have came out and said it's Birx and Fauci and everyone else said you're perfectly safe. You're perfectly safe. You're perfectly safe if you want to go out and you want to vote. So that's not true. There is no health risk. Again, this is exactly, the Boston Globe is parroting the very propaganda that they are accusing the right of doing. To cast doubt on the results of November's election. I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. I really do. He told Fox News' Chris Wallace last Sunday, I do too. When asked if he would accept this election's results, he said, I'll have to see. Former Vice President Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee, has taken to issuing foreboding warnings of his own. The president is trying to indirectly steal the election by arguing that mail-in ballots don't work. They're not real. They're not fair. He said at a fundraiser on Thursday night, he has also mused publicly about Trump having to be escorted forcibly, if need be, from the White House. That happened in one of the 4 scenarios that the Transition Integrity Project gamed out, according to summaries of the exercise provided to the Boston Globe. So the only people this Transition Integrity Project gave their transcripts to was the Boston Globe. So that's why all these papers or all these people talking about this Tron Podesta war game, election war games, are quoting the Boston, what we're reading. They're quoting this because they're the ones who were given the paper. The constitutional experts and the gameplay was less focused on the possibility of a cinematic militarized intervention on Inauguration Day, which is a possibility many still consider remote, than the room the Constitution appears to leave for a disastrous and difficult transition if the incumbent does not accept a loss. How well is our constitutional legal system designed to deal with an incumbent president who insists that he won an election but for the presence of fraud, that he would have won it except for fraud? Said Lawrence Douglas, a professor at Amherst College, who has written a book on what would happen if Trump took such a stand. And I think the rather unfortunate answer is our system is not well designed at all to deal with that problem, said Douglas, who was not involved in the wargaming. Brooks got the seed of the idea for the Transition Integrity Project after a dinner where a federal judge and a corporate lawyer each told her they were convinced the military or the Secret Service would have to escort Trump out of office if he lost the election and would not concede. Brooks wasn't so sure. She and Gilman decided to turn the Washington parlor game into an actual exercise. They held an early meeting in Washington with about 25 people in December. This last December, before all this pandemic stuff before it all hit, they're using the pandemic now. But they're saying back in December they were thinking Trump wasn't going to leave the office. What would have given anybody any kind of idea that Trump really wouldn't leave the office back in December? When we started talking about this, we got a lot of reactions. Oh, you guys are so paranoid. Don't be ridiculous. This isn't going to happen, Brooks said. Two things have happened since then. Trump has displayed increased willingness to challenge mail-in ballots, and his administration has deployed federal forces to quell protests in front of the White House and in Portland, Oregon, and has threatened to do so in other cities. Protests. These aren't protests, these are riots. These are riots that were endangering people when he sent the military in, and he has actually been very reserved in doing any of that, to his credit. He has actually not played right into their hands that they're trying to get him into to create this narrative that they started back in December to prove this, right? So this is such a dishonest article. But anyways, that has really shaken people, Brooks said. What was really a fringe idea has now become an anxiety that's pretty widely shared. Brooks, Gilman, and others recruited a slate of players, including a former swing state governor, a former White House chief of staff, a former head of the Department of Homeland Security. They invited both Democrats and Republicans who they knew had concerns about Trump's comments on the election, or translated, who don't like Trump. Nearly 80 people in all were involved. The Republicans were described by participants as never Trumpers, or not Trump Republicans. They played using the so-called Chatham House rules, in which participants can discuss what was said, but not who was there. They played using the so-called Chatham House rules, in which participants can discuss what was said, but not who was there. Some participants were willing to be named. They included Republicans Trey Grayson, the former Kentucky Secretary of State, the conservative commentator Bill Kristol, as well as Democrat Leah Daughtry, who was the CEO of the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Convention Committees, former White House ethics czar Norm Eisen, and progressive Democratic strategist Adam Gentleson. The game was elaborate. The participants took on the roles of the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign, relevant government officials, and the media generally. How did they know back in December Trump or Biden was going to be the nominee? Interesting. Democrats played Democrats. Republicans played Republicans. Well, maybe they started in December, so maybe this was done before then. Okay, anyways. And used a 10-sided die to determine whether a team succeeded in its attempted moves. The games are not meant to be predictive. Rather, they were supposed to give people a sense of possible consequences in complex scenarios. Each scenario involved a different election outcome. An unclear result on election day that looked increasingly like a Biden win as more ballots were counted. A clear Biden win in the popular vote in Electoral College. An Electoral College win for Trump, with Biden winning the popular vote by 5% of the points. By 5 percentage points, and a narrow electoral college and popular vote victory for Biden. In the scenarios, the team playing the Trump campaign often questioned the legitimacy of the mail-in ballots, which often boosted Biden as they came in, shutting down post office, pursuing litigation, using right-wing media to amplify narrative about a stolen election. Right-wing media. That's a very small percentage of the actual media. Some participants, the game was a stark reminder of the power of incumbency. The more demonstrations there were, the more demands for recounts, the more legal challenges there were, the more funerals for democracy were held, the more Trump came across as a candidate of stability, said Edward Luce, the U.S. director of Financial Times, who played the role of the mainstream media reporter during one of the simulations. Possession is 9/10 of the law. In multiple scenarios, officials on both sides honed in on narrowly decided swing states that divided government, such as Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, hoping to persuade officials there to essentially send two different results to Congress. If a state's election is disputed, a legislator controlled by one party and a governor of another each could send competing slates of electors backing their party candidate. Both sides turned out massive street protests that Trump sought to control. In one scenario, he invoked the Insurrection Act, which he's been talking recently about doing. So see, they're bad. They've been trying to paint him into a corner, so they could say, see, he's doing it. See, he's doing it. He's doing the Insurrection Act. When in reality, the reason he's doing the Insurrection Act is because of the crazy leftist not protest, rioting and looting that's been taking place. That's why he's been flirting with that. But he hasn't done it yet because he's smart enough not to right now. Which allows the president to use military force to quell unrest. The scenario that began with a narrow Biden win ended with Trump refusing to leave the White House, burning government documents, and having to be escorted out by Secret Service. The team playing Biden in that scenario, meanwhile, sought to patch things up with Republicans by appointing moderate Republican governors, including Charlie Baker of Massachusetts, to cabinet positions. The scenario that produced the most contentious dynamics, however, was the one in which Trump won the Electoral College and thus the election, but Biden won the popular vote by 5 percentage points. Biden's team retracted his election night confession, fueled by Democrats angry at losing yet another election despite capturing the popular vote, as happened in 2000 and 2016. In the mock election, Trump sought to divide Democrats, at one point giving an interview to The Intercept, a left-leaning news outlet, saying Bernie Sanders would have won if Democrats would have nominated him. Meanwhile, Biden's team sought to encourage large Western states to secede unless pro-democracy reforms were made. The scenario seemed highly far-fetched, but it envisioned a situation in which both sides may have incentives to contest the election. There is a narrative among activists in both parties that the loss must be illegitimate, he said. According to the Constitution, the presidency ends noon on January 20th, at which point the newly inaugurated president becomes the commander-in-chief. The games ultimately were designed to explore how difficult it could be to get there. The Constitution really has been a workable document in many respects because we have had the people who more or less adhere to the Code of Conduct, said retired Army Colonel Larry Wilkerson, a Republican and former Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, who participated in games as an observer. That seems to no longer be the case. That changes everything. Yeah, it doesn't. It isn't the case anymore because of what's going on. So now that we've read that, I'll read this first paragraph and then we'll read this one, which I find very interesting. Okay? Just to give you some background. Let me move my face back over here, in case you guys can kind of read along. I don't know if you can or not. Probably too small, but whatever. This piece will follow up on the strategy involved in that piece and develop these in light of John Podesta's election war game and the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which just happened a couple weeks ago. In the Kenosha situation, we have armed groups on both sides creating a volatile situation in what increasingly looks like a pre-Civil War scenario. Altogether, we can now see the following as evident. Joe Biden's 2020 presidential bid now depends on a combination of A, severe social media and search engine censorship of book-burning proportions, true. Signs from the military that they will back Biden, per John Podesta, on the heels of C, an inconclusive election, mailed out blank ballots, and D, the Soros ring of the Black Lives Matter ability to engage in rioting and to pose as Trump-like supporters like QAnon and adjacent, such as Save the Children, in order to E, conduct a dangerous or illegal public stunt, a false flag. Trump's deep campaign has revolved around Christian, Gnostic, and New Age themes, which, with regard to the latter two, intersects themes of spirituality previously in the domain of the coastal left. These will form the substrate of the focus of this election being a contest of good versus evil, light versus dark, of the champions of the children against sexual predators, as well as anti-war and anti-vax themes, wherein warmongers like Hillary Clinton, alleged child abusers like John Podesta, and regulatory captors like captors of healthcare like Bill Gates serve as an anthropogenic reification of unadulterated evil. This is a novel phenomenon and does not represent pre-Trump Republican tropes and organization issues. Mainstream Republican tropes were represented at the RNC convention and worked to establish a continuity, even if an ill-fitted, between traditional conservatism, previously opposed to Trump, and Trump's hardcore base. The coup, the color revolution, and the Arab Springs. Past political contests after the assassination of Kennedy appear to be based upon a consensus on key relations among elected officials. because the permanent administration had consensus on these themselves. But the rise of Trump and the great lengths a part of the permanent administration has gone to frustrate his efforts, I can't read tonight, strongly indicate that there is now a political crisis and division so great at the level of leadership that all the soft power and coup methods used by the CIA abroad are now being used within the U.S. against the executive branch, which is true. We've been witnessing a soft coup for quite some time. As part of this, permanent administration appears to back Trump, or rather Trump appears to be their candidate, and this may well in part explain his electoral success in 2016, despite what appeared as an overwhelming odds to the contrary. Perhaps the most visible permutation of this division and crisis were the events in the desert of Syria and Iraq, where Pentagon-backed Kurdish YPG forces fought against CIA-backed ISIS forces, with Americans in the employ of these institutions embedded on either side, firing at each other and taking losses. It would make sense that a military intelligence, such as an incoherent and openly corrosive dynamic, would need to be finally headed off. Therefore, all the lessons drawn from the Color Revolution, the fourth generational warfare, counterinsurgency and hybrid warfare, learned in our study of the events of Yugoslavia, Occupy Wall Street, BLM, Libya, Syria, Egypt, Ukraine, Brazil, Venezuela, and lately Belarus, all become necessary reading in order to understand the absolutely destabilized position that the U.S. finds itself in as we approach the 2020 election. This part right here, you guys go back, you guys should look up the fourth generational warfare, 4GW, counterinsurgency, hybrid warfare, learned in our study, and read Yugoslavia, Occupy Wall Street, because it's a very enlightening thing what our CIA does to these revolutions and how they have a hand in all of them. And we are seeing a hand in them right now here in the United States. We should expect, in line with the Color Springs tactics, that police will engage in the killing of black men, orchestrated by police secret societies operating on behest of permanent administrations known colloquially, every time I say it out loud, I can't get the damn words out. I can't fucking say that right now. Holy crap. Colloquially. I cannot say it. I can say it in my brain. And hereafter as the deep state. So we're just going to call it the deep state. Colloquially. I'm saying it too many times. Have mercy, Lord. These will be timed in such a way for maximum utility with regard to high-low points in the campaigns of the two candidates. So, the deep state, the permanent administration, right? That's what we're talking about. Kenosha on fire. Such an incident just occurred on August 23rd in Kenosha, Wisconsin, in the shooting of a black man, Jacob Ballot. I know it's Blake, but I call him Ballot. Standard and divisive motives followed. The event was not clear-cut. The definitive aspects of the case are open to interpretation and subject to confirmation bias in the public's eye. Me and my good friend, who's a diehard conservative, didn't see eye to eye on this. We got into a little back and forth on Facebook. But it's true. They did it in such a way that whether or not that was a planned, it was all planned. I don't know if it was all planned, that shooting, but it was exploited for sure. This will provoke reactions and polarizations, with the nuances and the facts of the situation and its context often traded in for political expedience. Pro-law enforcement types more closely associated with conservative politics will say the shooting was justified prior to hearing of the facts, and will include biographical information about Block A, which demonstrates his past criminal offenses, which I also don't ever think really play into it. It's always what happened in that moment. While ignoring these past offenses do not form the basis for legitimizing its summary execution. Likewise, anti-police liberals will condemn the shooting as racist and unjustified without regard to the views on race of the police involved, and without a review of the actual facts that anti-Trump corporate media was reluctant to expose, but which were contained in the police report. At the same time, here is a long history of police falsifying evidence and statements to justify shootings such as these. So basically what they do is they set it up to where there's enough plausible deniability on both sides to where it'll cause mass division among people. That's what it's saying right there. It's a perfect situation to cause mass division. Note that the governor of Wisconsin, the Democrat Tony Evans, is one who declared a state of emergency for COVID-19 in an unpopular lockdown. He, as a career government bureaucrat, was met by mobilization of armed citizens against those dictates. Yet the fallout and the riots in the aftermath of the blockade shooting, of which the Evers-mandated high unemployment per lockdown forms the substrate, but yet expressed through BLM Antifa riots, will be blamed on Trump, whose years in public service can be counted on in a single hand, and whose general efforts have been to end the lockdown and reopen the economy. Evers will not call on rioters to observe social distancing and will call the armed detachments involved in arson and looting protesters, and the constitutionalist militias who deployed to protect the rights of both protesters, the police of both the protesters and civilians, as right wing. So we'll call the protesters good and we'll call the Trump supporters, the patriots, bad. Again, creating massive division. The increasing emergence of the armed peaceful protesters, an Orwellian oxymoron as a phrase in itself, first appeared in the Syrian conflict, where American corporate media and fake left publications like Counterpunch regularly referred to armed Al-Qaeda, ISIS, FSA groups engaged in shooting and killing as peaceful protesters. Remember that. So we're comparing what the CIA has done in the Middle East and in other parts of the world to what they're doing here right now. If you go back to the Syrian conflict where Bashar al-Assad was trying to kick the terrorists out of his country, we were backing and calling the Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and FSA groups peaceful protesters and resistant fighters, right? I think it was too, Ray. That was my whole take too. Anyways, in our past pieces, we have explored the mechanisms that the DNC and the permanent administration will use to nullify or falsify the outcome of the 2020 presidential election in November. This included the use of the Democrat governors in certain states, as we previously wrote, to declare a state winner so that its electors go to Biden, in manufactured cases where the desired vote by state citizens could not be determined. It included the use of NGO employees, labor, BLM, and Antifa activists alongside contract tracers to use the coronavirus and social upheaval around manufactured racial justice issues to interfere with voters' access to polls and voters' use of mail-out ballots and ballot harvesting schemes. In our last piece, we disclosed that the DNC plans to have Biden declare himself the winner of the election, whatever the pending, inconclusive, tampered, stolen, etc. outcome may be. In a separate piece published on FRN, this author explained that for the Trump strategy against the riots to work would require a plan that involved the co-opting of the BLM hashtags by his supporters. This would mean a separation of the BLM from Antifa, the latter being a designated terrorist group. We explained that this approach would be similar to that taken by Russia and Syria in the Syrian war, where certain Free Syrian Army units had to be separated from ISIS, so that these FSA units could be considered legitimate opposition. A change of tact in itself. Previously, all armed oppositions were considered illegitimate by the Syrian government. Anybody trying to dethrone you, if you're the legitimate ruler of a nation, you don't care if they're FSA or ISIS. They're terrorists. All of them are terrorists to you and are insurgents trying to take you down. The same thing is going to happen here where BLM and Antifa will get separated because Antifa is going to get the terrorist organization. I think BLM should too, but they won't. There's way too much corporate sponsorship behind BLM for them to get designated a terrorist organization, which they should be. Right. Okay, so I'll cover that. I'll read that last line. Even incorporated into joint attacks with the Syrian Arab Army. Of particular interest will be how the public and the courts view the actions of Kenosha Guard militia member Kyle Rittenhouse. These two videos, the news commentary dubbed over to the contrary, show Rittenhouse acting in self-defense. It also shows that those with him provided first responder assistance to the man who pulled a gun on Rittenhouse and who was subsequently, the Q and the U are getting me tonight, subsequently was shot in the arm. The dude pulled a gun. So I'm not going to go through, we covered that if you were on here. It absolutely was self-defense. So, rolling back up here to the bullet point we just read. Kenosha on fire. How the media and the left politicized that. That was one example. We could pick a lot of them. And what has happened and how the CIA plays in that. Now the censorship. Let's go to the censorship. We now know, per the New York Times, that Facebook execs have been meeting to implement a strategy to censor information that Donald Trump has won the 2020 election. Because of the working contingency plan, which appears to still be in operation, the Biden will declare victory regardless of the determinable outcome, as we previously wrote. This, however, as we explained, would result in a vote in the Congress and Senate where it's likely that Nancy Pelosi may assume the presidency. Oh, dear God. Help us. Simultaneously, Facebook execs have had a difficult time pushing against a terrified DNC, which has been making irrational demands to further censorship. Why are the DNC censorship demands on Facebook irrational? The DNC demands are fear-based and reactionary. And while Facebook execs have been happy to do the bidding of the DNC and pro-deep state Republicans, they know the request to further censor pro-Trump Twitter accounts are known to produce the opposite effect. This is confirmed by the known science of the subject. Studies on social revolutions and regime legitimacy show that further censorship in an environment where citizens have access to alternate information lines only erodes the legitimacy of the regime. Such a study was conducted on how the DDR tried to cover up the mass exodus of citizens from West Germany some 30 years ago. Sometimes less is more. Censorship, news falsification, and disapproval in 1989 East Germany. Christian Glabel, Katrin Paula, 2019. Facebook execs called upon MIT to conduct a study to help establish their case, and a layman's version of the conclusions were published in MIT's online magazine Technology Review in a piece entitled, "It's Too Late to Stop QAnon with Fact Checks and Account Bans." In this article by MIT, it reported that Friedberg, who studied the movement deeply, says he believes it is absolutely too late for mainstream social media platforms to stop QAnon. Although there are some things they can do too. Say, limit its adherents' ability to evangelize on Twitter. Like the study of the DDR and the regime legitimacy, the DNC finds that more they push for censorship, the more popular the pro-Trump conspiracy theories will grow. What appears to be a workaround for the conundrum the deep state faces is a new development where the Soros wing of the Black Lives Matter has been instructed to stage at least one rally so far in Chicago that took place during the week of August 17th. In this, a group wearing what looked like Soros wing Black Lives Matter uniforms actually carried placards associated with QAnon, such as "Where we go one, where we go all," "Save the Children," and "Human Trafficking," and were replete with signs calling for ending the pedophile satanic cabal. Podesta simulation sees public looking to military for a sign. Of particular interest is that John Podesta recently ran a simulation on the DNC's approach and response to the election in 2020 where he played the role of Biden. This war game exercise was covered by David Frum of The Atlantic. Despite its counterfactual facts and erroneous presumptions, the findings were startling. Neither side would concede, courts would be slow to act, Antifa QAnon groups would clash in the streets, the actions of the military in either direction, or as with the National Guard, as deployed by the Justice Department under AG Barr, would be deciding the factor. In that simulation, there were a total of 67 players who met on Zoom in the first week of June. This was composed as a high-profile critics of Donald Trump, including law professors, retired military officers, former senior U.S. officials, political strategists, attorneys, and cable news editors. We have to reiterate that the Podesta playing the role of Biden understands that the real outcome of the election will therefore be the position the military takes. Almost done with this. A wing of Trump supporters, QAnon, are adamant that the A wing of the Trump supporters, QAnon, are adamant that the military intelligence, or at least an operation within the NSA, will not only back Trump, but have been backing Trump since before the 2016 election. They believe this particularly explains Trump's victory despite what they see as an election rigged by Clinton, thereby explaining Clinton's otherwise unfounded confidence that she would win by a landslide in the fateful election now 4 years ago. On the other side have been several notable members of the deep state, such as Colin Powell and former CIA Chief John Brennan. This all gels with the insider information that we have written about from SEIU, which, as explained previously, forms a nexus between Biden's ground campaign and its GOTV, Bernie's Our Revolution, and Working Families Party, Antifa, and BLM. The conclusion. The likelihood that the 2020 election will not produce an agreed winner, barring effective, active measures from Trump, is nearly certain. Based on the Northrop Standard Model, Trump has an over 90% chance of winning an election if following the rules in place in the past dozen election cycles. This explains why the DNC has introduced as many X factors as possible. A politicized COVID-19 response, slanted news which riles up reliable protest movement assets towards rioting and looting, and a mailed-out ballot scheme which is indistinguishable in effect from known problem vote rigging and techniques like ballot harvesting. It is clear that the DNC wants to produce no clear winner and use some combination of Article 20, 22, and provisions as reinforced by related constitutional provisions for continuation of government. Constitutional provisions for continuation of government and NSDP 51. Because there are so many variables, possible countermeasures, and the new X factors that can be introduced, this is a developing story with no clear outcome, now estimatable. If it is true that the NSA is backing Trump, then this provides strong reason to believe that this candidate will emerge the winner out of the fray. In either event, future X factors are almost certain. This is about a 2-minute read. I like the way this one reads out. Plays off of that last article. Then we'll be done. I don't even know how many people are on anymore. Probably none. Oh, wow. More than I thought. Okay, so this is the final article that ties everything back together. That last one was wordy, and I couldn't read it because my brain is getting tired. We're going to read this one, then we're going to call it a night. This one's going to wrap it all up in a nice little bow. A false flag is Biden's only chance to win. Comes from the Strategic Cultural Foundation. The Black Revolution is in full swing in the U.S. over the next 60 days. We will be treated the greatest political show on earth as Democrats and their handlers in the Davos crowd pursue the biggest lie since climate change. The events of 2020 are lining up for a climax to this story that ends with only one outcome, a contested election, which fuels a coup attempt after the election results come in on November 3rd. And because of this now obvious plan, move myself over here. I just think it looks better. And because of this now obvious plan, setting up a false flag around the election is the most likely means to produce election results close enough to support this course of action. I'm not the only one thinking in these terms at this point. Joaquin Flores, writing for Fort Russ, that's what we just read, mused similarly last week. As the polls shift towards Donald Trump and the Democrats run around concocting fairy tales after allowing Joe Biden out of the GIMP cellar long enough for people to see how far he has fallen mentally, I'm nearly convinced this is likely. Color revolutions unfold in predictable stages. The first stage is destroying the local economy. Usually this means the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury pull back on available dollars through tight monetary policy and sanctions to create mass unemployment in the target nation. Does this sound familiar? Then foment violence from the youth who are disproportionately affected by the economic destruction after NGOs lay the ideological foundation for revolution. use the most convenient pretext. In the U.S., it means stoking racism and the hatred of the rich and white. Now it's white too. Of course, that's the stoking of racism, but anyways. Pick a color under which to unite them. In this case, black and blame. In this case, black and blame the leader for every single bad thing that happens, which is usually the work of agent provocateurs who amplify the organic frustration into targeted attacks, which are then amped up by the media into a news story. If the leader is stupid, he acts like a garden variety paranoid dictator by clamping down on the violence, making him an easy prey for the media to brand a dictator, which they've been trying to do this whole time, and they just can't quite get it, although they're throwing the narrative out there constantly. Then bringing a mob to the Capitol is easy, because now there are too many people to effectively be effectively policed, and the potential for violence to boil the whole thing into a coup is very real. Look what happened on the RNC convention with Rand Paul and other people right around in the D.C., how they've been forming up, they've been protesting in front of the White House, and I think this talks about it here, how they're talking about the 51-day siege of the White House going right up into Election Day. They're bringing in the masses right now. We have all the unrest we need. Everything this guy is saying right now is laying out in perfect form before us. All of this works if the oligarchs who run the political system of the target country are on board with this. In the U.S., it's obvious from the response from all major corporations they approve of this message. Note how it failed in Belarus recently for lack of the corporate sponsorship. Who's on board with the BLM movement right now? Every corporation in America. Looking at the way the Democrats have positioned themselves for this election, it is clear that they are preparing the field for this outcome after Election Day. They used the lockdowns to create an army of ready-made protesters with nothing else to do and little hope for the future. They structured all aid to the middle class, to the middle class to run out during the height of the election campaign, while blocking any further assistance, even through the Treasury Department, even though the Treasury Department raised nearly $2 trillion to deploy as support and stimulus. The Treasury has raised $2 trillion, God knows how, to deploy to the middle class, and then who's holding it up right now? Right? The elites. Who's holding it up the most? The Democrats. The media endlessly stoked its fear over COVID-19 to push as many voters to consider mailing their votes in, or to create the illusion that this is what will happen, to delay certification of the election on election night. But to his credit, President Trump hasn't acted the way he was supposed to. He has governed this chaos exactly the way a majority of Americans wanted him to, as a federalist. Even though he gave a lot of money away and he's talking about vaccines, but anyway. Even though he has the authority to do so, he's refrained from sending federal troops into rioting cities, laying bare just how much local authorities are aiding the violence. He's played a lot of that pretty damn well, showing that the reason we're having these violence in these places is because of the Democrats. He didn't institute national lockdowns and draconian restrictions due to COVID-19, instead offering aid and allowing the data to eventually vindicate him to the point where even the CDC is now backtracking on how dangerous the virus actually is, which they have been in the last couple weeks. And his opponents in New York, for example, now look like out-of-touch, lying grandma murderers, right? They're coming out. Cuomo a couple days ago came out and said that all the problems in New York are due to Trump, right? He came out and just said that. Because Trump's let hands off on a lot of these places and letting the stink stick to the people it needs to stick to. So he has played a lot of that well. Eventually, crisis fatigue sets in. People adjust to the new circumstances, and the worst part is their fear abates. And even if they don't look at the new data, they realize enough costs have been borne and it's time to move on with our lives. That is what is now showing up in the polling data, even though it is still highly suspect, and this puts Trump in the driver's seat for the election on November 3rd. As of today, the election looks like it's his to lose. Yet the Democrats insist that the election will not be resolved on Election Day. In fact, it's obvious they are prepping the narrative that Trump will only appear to win on election night. But in fact, the torrent of mail-in ballots will change the outcome of the election over the next few days. Of course, this would fly in the face of decades of electoral statistics where the outcome of the election is almost certainly decided by the time 25% of the votes have been counted and a run rate to completion can be calculated. Then we talk about the red mirage that came out from Axios. The top Democrat data and analytics firm told Axios on HBO, it's highly likely that President Trump will appear to have won, potentially in a landslide on election night, even if he ultimately loses when all his votes are counted. 1 second, please. 1 second. Hey, babe. Because I'm streaming right now. I'm reading an article. Sorry about that. This is my wife. I can't have a live stream without her calling in. A Democrat data and analytics firm Axios on HBO, it's highly likely that President Trump will appear to have won, potentially in a landslide on election night, even if he ultimately loses when all his votes are counted. More violence is how. We are 2 weeks away from the White House siege beginning on September 17, organized by Adbusters, which is a front for George Soros' partner in crime. David Brock and Media Matters for America, White House siege is a planned 50-day protest in Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C., ostensibly to protest Trump stealing the election. This is a ready-made receipt for a maiden-like orgy of violence in the nation's capital to create a false flag event which reflects badly on Trump. Think snipers on rooftops shooting both protesters and cops, similar to what happened in the Maidan Square in Kiev in 2014. D.C. is not a state. It's governed by the same rules as D.C. is not a state. It's governed by the same rules as the states, where the governors are in charge. Trump can, and in his mind should, as a matter of strategy, take control of D.C. to keep possibility of violence to a minimum. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser is trying to walk back her support of the protest after the violence after the Republican National Convention by urging U.S. attorneys in D.C. to charge people for the police arrest. This is Bowser trying to publicly keep Trump from doing exactly what I said he should do. Because with cities looted and burned, with Democrat politicians losing the respect of their constituencies, they have no political legs left to stand on. Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York said in a press conference, Trump better bring an army if he plans to set foot in his state. This is tantamount to sedition, for which a case can be made by nearly every major Democrat for statements made in the past 6 months. Meanwhile, Cuomo is the target of the Department of Justice's investigation into his handling of the COVID-19 crisis, while Trump withholds funds from their state, which prompted Cuomo's bravado. Between this and the Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Republicans' domestic enemies of the state, between this and the Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling Republicans domestic enemies of the state, is the kind of language you don't come back from. The Democrats in the U.S. deep state are all in on removing Trump from office by any means necessary. I don't think the worst of the violence is behind us after Kenosha. I think the worst is still in front of us. Okay, that was a long read. I don't know how many people are still with us. That was, but basically that was just to say things are going to get crazy. Way crazier than we think they can. It's 2020, man. I wouldn't even be surprised if an asteroid hits us. And at this time, I'm kind of like, maybe an asteroid would help clean stuff up. You guys need to keep your heads on swivels when you're out there, especially if you're white, unfortunately, because now you are the bad enemy. You always have been, but you really are now. And stay close to your families. Get out and vote. I'm not happy with a lot of what Trump has done when it comes to this pandemic as of recently. And I'm really not even convinced presidents mean anything much anymore. But having said all of that, I still am hoping that Trump wins, because then at least there's less of the quickness of what the left wants to roll out. Some of my friends would disagree with me on that have been Trump supporters. Dustin to be one of them when he watches this, if he watches it. But I'm still hoping he wins. But things are going to get crazy, and keep your eyes open, because the election's going to be and the protests and everything else are going to be crazy too. So, all right, guys, I just wanted to get on and do a stream. I feel like it went way too long. It didn't have a lot of energy, but it was at least good to chat with you guys. And I hope you guys do well. And we will talk to you real soon. Keep an eye on the channel. I've got some changes coming up. It's going to be good. So we're going to get a little more consistent here. And until next time, it's SJG Perspective. I'm not going to do the D Live tonight because I don't have it up. Well, you know what? Maybe I will. Maybe I'll just go there real quick and do some D Live action for my D Live people. It's not fair to them, right? I got 2 people in there. So let's see here. How much lemons? I got 20. I don't know if I got enough lemons to. Oh, guys, I can't. I don't have enough lemons. I'm sorry. I would give you guys lemons, but I don't have any lemons to give you right now. So you're shit out of lemons. So, or I'm shit out of lemons. All right, guys. Until next time, it's SJG Perspective. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good night. Bye.